Hello out there, everybody, and happy Sunday. Welcome to the Liberty Revolt on 1360 KHNC Freedom Radio.
We hope everyone in our country had a wonderful 4th of July.
Absolutely. And, in light of the 4th of July and feeling extra patriotic this year, and I mean it, that's what we all need right now, is a little extra patriotism.
Honestly, I was considering not celebrating 4th of July just in light of the lockdowns and everything else going on. I was a little discouraged, but upon seeing the vitriol to which the left is disdaining our country on this, the one day set aside to appreciate the good things that we have done, I've decided I'm going all out. I love this country.
I mean, if you're going to bash the U.S. every single other day, we've been protesting for a month and a half, can we have one day where we're not just spewing polemic about this country? And I mean, a virus coming in from China is certainly no reason not to celebrate the USA.
As citizens of the United States of America, we've been given an incredible blessing. The history of America continues to be one of hope, idealism, liberty, and progress. Through the generations, we've managed to transform the country we inherited as we've passed it down to future generations better than we've found it. What unites us is stronger than what divides us, as we forge ahead with bravery, sacrifice, and reverence towards a stronger, freer nation that lives up to our founding ideals. Our Declaration of Independence and Constitution were written with a vision for a world beyond its time, and although we've struggled to live up to it throughout our history, we have gotten closer with time and brought much of the world along with us.
Yeah, the funny thing is, it's the ideals in the American Declaration and Constitution that make this country able to sustain such division and such partisanship. And right now, no matter how much we rage and yell at each other and riot in the streets, the fact remains that we are allowed to do that we can go out there and make our voices heard because of something like the Constitution, which endures more than any man. And we've seen that it has brought freedom not only to the United States of America, but to many other countries.
No other country has contributed as much good to the wider world, from financial generosity to technological inventions to liberating victims of tyranny around the world, often for very little in return. The argument over America's greatness should not be partisan or controversial. Although both sides of the political aisle have failed to recognize America's greatness in some sense, the narrative being pushed by today's Democratic Party is particularly misleading and dangerous. They are pushing a perspective on our reputation as a country that is deceptively twisted to place our country in a negative light and reference our shared history as reprehensibly and worthy of disdain as possible. They target our youngest and most impressionable people with a call to dismantle our country and implement in its place a governing system that has failed and brought death, suffering, and poverty everywhere they have tried it. A Gallup poll found that only 22% of Democrats were, quote, extremely proud to be Americans, a 10-point decrease from the year prior, and a trend that continues. This is, of course, exaggerated by a mainstream media narrative that mocks the idea of American exceptionalism and selectively presents statistics to portray America in the worst possible way. The great irony is that the freedom to express such anti-American sentiment is one of the many examples that make America a remarkable country. Try going to North Korea and saying that North Korea was never great. Sure, some other countries have comparable freedom. Some are even economically freer. But we can't seriously overlook that fact that America has been the beacon that has led the world in its march towards freedom, prosperity, and equality. It took 150 years after the founding of the United States for democratic ideas to start taking hold around the world. And all of the countries typically touted as better than America are living under the security of American power. None of them would have the strength nor competence to exist as they do now if America wasn't shielding them from the political and military conquests of China and Russia. Almost all of the civil rights and political freedoms around the world have occurred in the last few hundred years and have largely been led by the West, particularly America. If you care about liberal values, if you are progressive, dismantling the American system and handing the torch of global dominance over to Russia and China is the most anti-liberal, anti-progressive, anti-human rights, anti-environment, anti-equality approach to progress that has ever been thought up. It is plain stupid.
I think this is what people forget, is when they want to throw America under the bus, when they say we're not doing a good job with our people and we can't be doing a good job as a global superpower, imagine who's going to step in to fill the power vacuum. And ladies and gentlemen, we need to remember that there will be a power vacuum. If the U.S. steps out of it, the second most powerful and third most powerful nations in the world, Russia and China, respectively, are going to fill that void. And let me tell you, when you have two governments who care so little about human rights that both of them have deemed to make themselves dictators for life, you can imagine they may not do as good of a job as the democratic U.S. in leading the global push for freedom.
Although the United States does not top the world in every category, as a sum of all of its parts, we are the best. We have the most robust economy. We have freedoms that are constitutionally guaranteed. As the U.S. falls, so does everyone else. America is the least racist, the most rights-based country. It has the best creed. It has the best opportunities. And that is why the U.S. is the most desired place by migrants from around the world and brings in the overwhelming majority, about 22% of all the world's immigrants, over 25 million a year. And this doesn't include the over 1 million illegal immigrants that have been crossing into the United States every year. We also take in the most refugees, welcomed 76,000 last year alone. As of 2019, the United States is home to 51 million foreign-born illegal residents, making up about 15% of our population. Yes, there are individual racists living amongst American society, and income and wealth inequality, poverty, and homophobia remain problems with much to be desired. However, America is the most diverse, most multicultural society in history, and that comes with advantages and unique cultural challenges. No form of ethnic or national discrimination should be overlooked, but the only countries that do better in these categories are significantly smaller and more homogeneous. And no other country is so self-critical. Slavery, oppression, and racism have been human universals for as long as humans have settled the earth. And yet only in America are people so invested in their guilt. Nobody is satisfied with the way detained illegal immigrants have been managed in this country. But our borders have also been drastically overwhelmed with more immigrants than any modern country has ever dealt with. More than 100,000 crossing our borders illegally every month, with very dangerous human traffickers exploiting bad immigration policies and a lack of funding or security. The left refuses to address this. They want to end family separation, which sounds nice, but how do you do it? When a migrant crosses the border with a child, we have 4 or 5 options. Either we arrest them both and take them both to jail until a court date, which may be 3 years later. We hold the adult in a jail and we send the child to a temporary daycare, which is what we've been doing, and Democrats have refused to fund these daycares and decry it as family separation. We refuse them access and leave them stranded in the Mexican desert, or spend billions in tax dollars to fly them back to their original countries, or we release them into the interior of the United States and expect them to show up to a court date 3 years later, of which less than 1/3 tend to do. Border agents are routinely finding the same child being recycled by smugglers to gain easy access back and forth across the border. The drug cartels and human traffickers know full well that all they need to do is bring a child with them, and it's typically a get-in-free pass. Our policy should not be anyone who purchases or kidnaps a child can walk freely into the interior of the country for the sake of making it easier for others. The only reasonable policy we can take is to build barriers and utilize technologies to deter illegal crossings, change the policies that incentivize child trafficking, and once and only once we've managed operational control of our borders can we divert some funding away from illegal immigration enforcement and towards funding the processes of legal immigration.
Yeah, and this is what I don't get about people's argument against the wall, is if we built the wall and made it harder for immigrants to come over, immigrants, of course, are economically viable to the U.S. Great. We can build the wall and make it easier for skilled immigrants, of which there are millions who would love to come to the U.S. to get in here and get a job and prop up our country with their labor and entrepreneurship. I don't see why we are so against having operational control of our borders.
All strict border security is giving a voice to the citizens here. The American people deserve to have a say of who, how many, of what merit, and from where we bring in immigrants. We have established a system of immigration laws because it is proper, and because the alternative is unsustainable, unsafe, and diminishes the economic and political voice of our own people. Democrats want illegal immigration because they believe it is a way for them to import future Democrat voters, and that is all. They exploit race to bolster their argument, or lack thereof, as per our usual arrangement. If America was anywhere near as racist and oppressive as the left-wing narrative tries to contend, why is it that so many ethnic minorities from around the world fight so hard to get here? More so than any country on earth, many risking all they have, including their lives. To be oppressed? Why is it that the children of immigrants from all over the world, China, Nigeria, India, Korea, Japan, have frequently, and the frequently praised countries like Denmark and Norway, regularly do better than native-born Americans and their own counterparts in their original countries? Why is it that 2 million Africans have immigrated here in the last 50 years, more than 4 times the number of slaves brought from Africa throughout the entire transatlantic slave trade, to live under white supremacy? Why is it that the most affluent ethnic group in the United States is Asians, outperforming whites in education and business and making up almost none of the prison population? Was the Constitution written in Japan?
You know, I promise you something. There is no one sitting in a foreign country who's considering moving to the U.S. saying, well, I think I'll avoid the U.S. because that place is really racist. I guarantee you, pretty much 0 people have said that over the history of time, because the truth is, guys, that every single nation has problems with racism. And when you have a more homogenous nation with a smaller minority population, usually it trends towards more discrimination towards that minority population from the majority, because it becomes easier. When you have a diverse melting pot like the USA, of course we're going to run into issues. But what we're going to do is put those issues out in the open. We're going to try and solve them. And we are going to achieve liberty and justice for all, as my co-patriot told you with his statistics.
Of all the countries frequently touted as superior to the United States, they all have significantly stricter immigration policies and tend to be much more homogenous, typically more homogeneously white, ironically. Mass shootings are a problem. Gun violence is a problem. High incarceration rates are a problem. Lacking educational standards, prescription drug abuse, the cost of health care. Yet America has a higher life expectancy rate than any of the top 10 most populous countries. Sure, we've had our moral failings, like every country in human history, especially the most powerful ones. But no country has been as generous and responsible with global dominance. And our failures are dwarfed by our great contributions to the world. America has been the driving force for human progress in human history. America is among the only countries in the world to send its own soldiers to die for the freedom of those in other countries. America wasn't founded on imperialism. It fought to end it. It fought to end slavery. American generosity, innovation, and investments have lifted more people out of poverty than all other countries combined. It has supported some authoritarian regimes, which is a shame. But it has also spread democracy and stopped the spread of communism and authoritarianism all around the planet. Other countries' freedoms are only superficial, as they only exist under the umbrella of American strength. Some other countries may have freedom, but it's a false equivalency. Canada has gun restrictions because you can't own a gun until you prove to the government that you're worthy. And when you do, they keep track of it. Freedom of speech is really not equal because of the vague and shifting concept of hate speech laws. You can't even say that a man is a man and a woman is a woman without risking fines, jail, or losing your job. In the UK, businesses can be shut down for having the wrong religious beliefs. That's always Christianity, never Islam.
Interesting.
Gun laws are extremely strict. Belgium and France have let Islam become so strong in Europe that Islamic communities have established Sharia law courts and laws. Human rights, women's rights, civil rights, all excused for the sake of cultural tolerance. Furthermore, Europe would be speaking German if it wasn't for the US. Japan was founded on the idea of societal structures of predeterminants, a place that sought to spread tyranny across the globe several times, where gun rights are strict and religious freedom is also very strict. South Korea isn't under the power of North Korea only because of America. America has produced 68% of the world's wealth and contributed 50% of the world's medical innovations and have led the world in tech research, including AI, space, aerospace, robotics, cultural exports, and technology. Here are a short list of innovations that America has brought to the world. Electricity, the light bulb, photographic film, the disc record, the phonograph, oil, airplanes, helicopters, the fire truck, the MRI machine, the artificial heart, rocket fuel, the computer, nylon, mass production of cars, the automatic transmission, the microwave, the nuclear submarine, disposable diapers, the integrated circuit, the first laser, LED lighting, the compact disc, Kevlar, the lunar module, laser printers, 3D printers, fiber optic cable, the computer, the internet, email, telephone, the cell phone, the first space shuttle, GPS, hearing aids, the electric guitar, the dishwasher, garbage disposals, mechanical system oscillator.
Wow.
The microprocessor, multi-stage rockets, nail guns, the Oculus Rift, quantum cascade lasers, semi-truck trailers, smoke detectors, space telescopes, the soldering gun, the teleprompter, the television, the thermostat, the touchscreen, the tow truck, the vacuum cleaner, the vibrator, video game consoles, the weather satellite, tasers, General Tso's chicken, car airbags, pacemakers, anesthesia, that's a good one, DNA sequencing, fire alarms, fire sprinklers, the flashlight, fluorescent lamps, ice cream makers, industrial robots, instant cameras, integrated circuits, loudspeakers, chemotherapy, the traffic light, cardiac defibrillators, the transistor, Voyager 1, the Mars rover, the Saturn V rocket, the cyclotron atom smasher, the solar panel, nuclear power, wind turbines, air conditioning.
Yeah. So if people want to go out in the street and step on the flag, I suggest they make like a giant pile of all the things that the U.S. has invented too, and they climb to the top and they stomp on all of it.
Absolutely.
If you're going to stomp on the
it
flag,
on your cell phone,
you may as well. I mean, if you're going to burn it, you may as well stack up a pile of all the American inventions and burn that with it. And, you know, one thing, I don't care if the U.S. has fought these wars for freedom in self-interest. I don't care if we've invented things and made ourselves and other people rich in self-interest. It doesn't matter because the result is the same. We are a pragmatic people. And being pragmatic means caring about results. I'm sorry, I don't care about intentions on this point. If we've made the world a better place, I'm going to be happy about it, and I'm going to be proud of it. And I'm not going to say, well, we did that for only ourselves, because it really doesn't matter. Because if China did something like this, they would be doing it only for themselves, but it would not be for the freedom of other nations. I promise you that.
The U.S. is barely in the top 10 of the richest countries per capita, but it is the most charitable of any country in the world. In absolute dollar contributions, there is no comparison. The United States is the most generous country on earth, period. Even non-money charity, the U.S. tops the list or is near it. No country in world history has had so many of its own citizens pour aid and resources into uplifting others. Every other empire in world history conquered others and diminished the freedoms of others. China is the second wealthiest nation. By the way, their economy is growing twice as fast. Keep this in mind. China is the second wealthiest nation. It ranks towards the very bottom as one of the least generous countries in the world. American universities are the envy of the world. The U.S. dollar is the world's unofficial currency. The U.S. also has been the provider of the best amusement parks and by far the largest road network and most extensive wilderness preservation. And what would the world have done without fast food? Bill Clinton said, there's nothing wrong with America that can't be fixed by what's right with America. It's important to analyze America's failures, learn from its mistakes, and insist on high standards. However, patriotism is warranted and justified. This country is the biggest magnet for people around the world. They vote with their feet and often risk everything reaching for the American dream. Have you ever heard of the Chinese dream?
I haven't heard of the Chinese dream, the Russian dream, the North Korean dream, the Vietnamese dream. In fact, I've never heard of I'm sure there's some equivalency, but the point is people from every single one of these nations do want to come to the U.S., and they do make it a better place.
And it's interesting, the people who scream so loudly about how much they dislike America refuse to leave. How often do Americans leave? They're voting by not using their feet. It's easy to take the blessings of the United States for granted. This country is the greatest country in the history of the world.
You know, there was a hashtag going around yesterday on 4th of July called hashtag What Are You Celebrating on Twitter? And it is accompanied by the hashtag F the 4th. And it looks like the top video here is saying that 4th of July is a holiday for white supremacists. Everybody on here is making sure to bash the U.S. for a current or historical sin. And it's so interesting to me because you can never imagine Americans pointing their finger at Japan and saying, oh, you guys in Pearl Harbor, we remember that. We're not going to forget. You need to apologize for, let's see, 167 years. Because that's what they're asking so many Americans who, were born today and had nothing to do with these historical institutions of oppression to do right now. And people refuse to celebrate the amazing things about the U.S. because of the historical sins that it's committed. And this just doesn't seem to happen anywhere else. It's like looking at the world through a keyhole and you've already lost the key because you were too busy stomping on the flag.
It is interesting. I mean, Mexico has one of the most corrupt governments in history, but have you ever heard of a left-winger criticizing Mexico celebrating its special day?
No, I don't think no one in the U.S. is going to criticize another country for celebrating themselves. I mean, we celebrate Chinese New Year in National Day over here half the time. We say, oh yeah, we could celebrate, the Chinese New Year, and we could celebrate the Chinese day of the formation of the CCP. No one says a word about it. And if they do, they're racist.
Yeah, we are so self-critical.
And I mean, I think it's okay.
It's a good
to
thing.
Be self-critical.
It's a good thing. But they hold the United States to a standard that they don't hold to any other country.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, every time America has interfered in a place like Iran, when we supported the Shah, the Iranian Revolution happened, and now Iran is one of our enemies. When we armed the insurgents in Afghanistan against Russia, they became the Taliban. When we armed the rebels in Iraq, they became ISIS. So every time we intervene in something that is objectively immoral or bad, we could say, it turns out badly for us. I mean, it's not like, we're looking at these things and creating a bunch of friends for ourselves. So when we do something bad, we do feel the effects of it. And just because that happens, it means that we can at least look forward to the future and say, okay, we can change our foreign policy and realize that when we destabilize places, it's going to come back to nip us in the butt. So moving forward, I think we can learn from history and do better. And I think, especially in the 21st century, with the exception of the Iraq War, we have been doing better foreign policy-wise. We've been very non-interventionist in this century. Britain invaded 95% of the world's country at the heyday of the British Empire. Think about that. If we want to compare ourselves with another Western empirical power, and we're looking at Britain, the one we split away from on July 4th, I think we look a lot better by comparison. I mean, 95% of the world's countries. It's true. Look it up.
I think one area where the left goes wrong, and this is why they accuse the United States of white supremacy, and they blame white men for just about every wrong that has ever happened in the world, is because they are postmodernists who refuse to call out bad values.
They don't have values. Postmodernism gets rid of values. It dethrones values. It does nothing to
So where do you place the blame? You have to place it on people, and you can't place it on values, right? What was wrong with slavery? It's a bad value. It's wrong. It's wrong regardless who did it.
Right. This is a universal. It's a universal wrong, and that is usually what the left condemns it as. They condemn it rightly as a universal wrong, but what they don't realize is that their structure of dominance in U.S. universities purports postmodernism as a philosophy to be lauded, to be praised. And what postmodernism says is that there are no universals. We cannot say that anything is universally good or bad.
So they place it at the feet of people. Typically people who were not born when these sins occurred.
The U.S. is responsible with economic, industrial, and military dominance in its place as the #1 country in the world right now.
And why all of us, including and most especially liberals and progressives, should celebrate that the United States is the most dominant country on earth.
Right. If we're looking at progressivism from a spectrum that takes in more than the United States, that looks at the globe, then we need to understand that if the U.S. is not the dominant power in the U.S., in the world, it only makes sense that countries number 2, 3, or 4 would step in to fill the void. And countries number 2 and 3 are Russia and China. Now, I don't know if anybody needs a reiteration of the human rights violations of either of these regimes, but they are egregious. I think it was yesterday that the UN Human Rights Commission, Human Watch, what they do, declared what the Chinese are doing to the Uyghur Muslims in Western China, a genocide. It actually meets the criteria for a genocide right now. Can you imagine that we have something that all these countries have agreed on is the worst sin you can perpetrate against a group of people, and that's happening today at this moment in Western China.
And this is under the umbrella of American power, right? If China feels so bold to get away with the human rights violations in its own country, as well as encroaching on every country near the South China Sea, as well as making preparations for military conquest of Taiwan and violating their treaty with Hong Kong, what do you think they're going to be emboldened to do if the United States was not there as a safeguard to protect the world?
Imagine, I mean, the United States has honest-to-God military bases in many places in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, specifically Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. So we have a East Asian sphere of naval control. Now, we are absolutely a bulwark to Chinese power and dominance in this region. China claims the entire South China Sea, all the way up to the borders, maybe, 5 miles away from any country that also is in the South China Sea.
It literally builds artificial islands so that it could further encroach on these countries.
So when China begins encroaching, and I believe this happened yesterday as well, the U.S. sends in the aircraft carriers. The U.S. shows its naval dominance and might to China every time they try to encroach on these countries who have historically had every single claim to the sea that's only a few miles from their land borders. Can you imagine if the U.S. just up and disappeared? China already has and has built more warships than the U.S., but we have more aircraft carriers than every other country combined.
And you better believe that if China gets an opportunity to dismantle the United States economic and military system, it'll do it. And this is one of those examples of how the United States holds itself to a higher standard than any other country in the world. Because if we were to say, you know what, China, we don't really like what you're doing, we're going to by force diminish your military, by force diminish your economy, by force diminish your political influence, we would be roundly protested, not just by the world, but by our own people. But China, if they get an opportunity to do that to us, what do you think would happen?
Well, I think China is using every opportunity to economically undermine the countries that are a threat to its expansionist ideas. I mean, we already see what it does with debt traps in the countries that border the Indian Ocean. For example, Sri Lanka, Djibouti, Pakistan. They build ports for these countries, say, here you go, you got to pay us back for it. The countries cannot pay them back, so they seize the ports. So you see China already building up the infrastructure for sea lane control. And the only thing that keeps them from being dominant in this regard is U.S. naval and military power, which they are trying to undermine in the South China Sea and many other places around the world. They recently sunk not only a Japanese fishing boat, but a Vietnamese carrier as well. So I think we can understand that USA military dominance, and especially control of the ocean, promotes freedom insofar as it promotes free trade. When we took control of the sea from Britain after World War II, we proceeded to build up our military to the point where we could take control of these shipping lanes in the ocean. And now, if China tries to undermine that, they are not going to do it in the name of global shipping freedom. That's not how they operate their economy.
No, it's just like the global giving index. The United States is incredibly generous. China, just as big of a country, 5 times as many people, at the bottom of the list. Venezuela is more generous than China.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't see anyone castigating the Chinese for this because everyone knows they look out for their interests.
So in conclusion, the United States of America is the greatest country in the world. Not just the world, the history of the world. America is the greatest country that has ever existed. Ever. Period. And it's no contest. It doesn't even come close. Okay?
Guys, the innovation, the freedom, the foreign policy, the inclusiveness, the diversity, these are underrepresented, under-celebrated values of the U.S. We should never blindly praise this country. And with what's going on right now, I don't think that will ever be a problem. That's why we stand on this side of the aisle. Because we want people to understand that you want the U.S. in the #1 position. If you stand for progressivism, if you stand for freedom, if you stand for human rights, then you will vote for the U.S. as #1.
If you like today's show and you would like to support us, look at our article content, of which we've created much informative and interesting article content, please visit us at www.libertyrevoltmedia.com. That is www.libertyrevoltmedia.com.
We've got a distillation of today's content up, and it's called A Case for American Power. And you can see we're arguing for the U.S. in a globally dominant position and how it's almost impossible to argue against that if you care about human rights. That's at libertyrevoltmedia.com. Guys, if you would like to support talk radio, if you would like to support independent journalism and political idealism, please consider making a one-time donation at libertyrevoltmedia.com.
Or becoming a monthly sponsor or advertiser. We are currently looking for advertisers to advertise with us on our show during the commercial breaks on KHNC, or on our website, or on our Facebook page, or other social media platforms.
So we have opportunities for that, guys, if you want to be associated with the show. If you want to find your political voice, if you want to stand up against the majority who are vocal and may actually be a minority, and make ourselves the majority in this country again with our voices heard, then please follow us. Consider what we're doing as an opening to conservative voices.
Please consider liking or sharing our posts on social media, spreading the word. What we're trying to do is de-radicalize both sides in this country because we genuinely believe you need both sides. We need progressives pointing out discriminations and disparities, and we need conservatives digging their heels in and saying, whoa guys, let's not tear down the whole country in the process.
Well, we need the conversation more than anything, folks, and that's why we want to hear from you too. You can send us an email at libertyrevoltmedia@gmail.com, and please tell us what you want us to talk about, what you want us to cover, because we want to interact with the people in this country. We want to reach out to the community, and we want to hear your voices. We want to work as a microphone for you.
You're listening to the Liberty Revolt. www.libertyrevoltmedia.com on 1360 AM KHNC Freedom Radio! Happy Independence Day! in today. I hope you had a wonderful 4th of July. Be nice to each other. We love you.